The state of Qatar has invested around about $6 billion. Every investment had to have a story beyond it and had to have a multiplier effect, whether it's within the economy or for use beyond the World Cup. The challenges that we face with the pandemic, first, to ensure that it's a healthy and safe environment for the world to travel. Second, more importantly, is also to ensure that it is an accessible and affordable tournament. And third, it's to ensure that we learn how to deliver on both these two elements. Our commitment to sustainability has been demonstrated throughout the years. So stadiums that don't have a use beyond the tournament would be reduced. So we've got modular seats in a significant portion of our stadiums. These modular seats will be taken down, reconfigured into smaller size stadiums, and will be donated to football developing nations. And of course, we've subscribed to GSAS, which is a building standard code that commits to the high standards of sustainability as well. Apart from, of course, our commitment with the state in terms of changing people's behaviors or influencing people's behaviors in terms of sustainability, whether it's in terms of the preservation of water use or electricity or otherwise. In winning the Asian Games 2030, I think it demonstrates the importance that the state of Qatar holds sports. Our sports events are not just glory projects, rather they are accelerators, platforms for positive transformation, contributors to the economy. They are vehicles that pushes the country's momentum in terms of development. My measure of success about the World Cup, it's always looking beyond 2022 in the future. When people can remember Qatar in a very fond way, I would love nothing more than this World Cup to literally touch every Arab and Middle Eastern and be able to say that this has contributed in a positive way to their future.
SARS-like virus, which has infected hundreds in China.
COVID-19 is spreading faster in India.
Europe is now the epicenter.
The UK tonight acknowledged it's losing its battle.
And more than 3 million people have died.
Has now reached the United States.
Kingdom has become the first country to approve the Pfizer coronavirus vaccine.
The coronavirus pandemic has tanked the global economy.
It's worse for a single quarter than we ever saw during the Great Recession.
4.4 million people filing for initial jobless claims.
Around 50 countries have begun vaccination programs against COVID-19.
Other countries will have to wait a while longer.
Outrage at the death of George Floyd.
Demonstrations, riots, and violence from coast to coast.
The events in Washington have taken a violent and tumultuous turn.
Israeli airstrikes flattened 3 apartment buildings in Gaza City.
Administration's ambitious climate agenda. The change here is just monumental.
Coast to coast, signs of reopening.
Hundreds of families separated by COVID-19 were reunited at last.
Hello and welcome back to the Qatar Economic Forum powered by Bloomberg. The tensions were already simmering. The pandemic thrust them to the surface. COVID-19 struck while we were still coping with the political and social turmoil created by the 2008 financial crash. Turning the page on a year of historic tumult, we explore ideas for healing the wounds in post-pandemic society. We start with a bold agenda for female leadership.
I'm Elaine Verveer, and I'm so thrilled to be joined by the Honorable Hillary Clinton, the 67th U.S. Secretary of State, and by Her Excellency, Sheikha Hind bint Hamad Al Thani, the Vice Chairperson and the CEO of the Qatar Foundation. We are so pleased to be with both of you, and welcome to you both. Today, we are going to be discussing a more inclusive world, a bold agenda for female leadership. And I'd like to begin with Secretary Clinton, if I might. Madam Secretary, we have all been experiencing and continue to experience the terrible impacts of the pandemic. COVID has affected everyone, but it has disproportionately affected women and exposed those deep inequalities that persist, that we're seeing more clearly than ever. And these inequalities, of course, extend to economic impacts that have been rather severe. Can you talk some about that, as well as how we can take this terrible experience and build back better, both economically and in other ways for the benefit of all of society?
Thank you so much, Ambassador Verveer, and it is a great pleasure for me to join you and Your Excellency for this important forum. And I appreciate that first question because I think it is something that all of us should be paying close attention to. I can speak more from my own experience and observation here in the United States, but the issues that I will mention briefly are prevalent globally. Because of the pandemic, many of the jobs that women held were either eliminated or ended because of quarantine and lockdown, or they were deemed essential jobs, such as in healthcare or necessary retail establishments. So women were both losing their jobs in disproportionate numbers during the pandemic, and they were being forced to try to sustain a job without the support of a school that had been shut down or a child care center that also had been shut down. So the bottom line through much of the world is that the pandemic certainly affected everyone, regardless of who we are or where we live, and it continues to do so very sadly, but it disproportionately impacted women. So we saw the economic inequality. We also saw the extra responsibilities that women shoulder because of our role as caregivers, both in our own families and particularly to our children, but also in many instances for our parents or grandparents who were at particular risk because of the dangers of the coronavirus. That burden on top of everything else, which women were having to, again, disproportionately bear, has left a lot of repercussions. And then, of course, we saw in too many places decisions being made because of the impact of the pandemic that led to an increase in child marriage again, to an increase in domestic violence. So there's a lot that we have laid bare because of this pandemic that demonstrates once again that often problems and crises which affect all of humanity disproportionately affect women. So as we try to come out of this pandemic, or in places in much of the world where the pandemic is still raging, both governments and businesses and the not-for-profit sector have to be particularly attentive to making sure that women's lives and the burdens that they have shouldered are recognized. And I really applaud our new administration, the Biden-Harris administration in the United States, for understanding that and taking some bold steps, including an increase in something we call the child tax credit that will provide essential economic assistance to a lot of families that are still nowhere near back to normal. And that's particularly true of single-parent families where the mother has to be both the caregiver and caretaker as well as the income producer. So I hope everyone, governments, businesses, and the not-for-profit sector understand that we have a lot to do to try to create some sense of recovery for so many millions, tens of millions of women across the world.
Your Excellency, I wonder if you can take us to Qatar and tell us what impacts you have seen, but also as the head of a foundation that works so effectively in so many countries, perhaps the impacts that the foundation is hearing about and is concerned about. And I know you're also interested in how it has affected women and their careers. So we'd love your perspective on all of this.
First of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be between both of you and share some of my perspective and my own experience. In Qatar, just like any other country, the effect the pandemic has had on everyone is really, I mean, it's something that it will take us years to understand. Personally, from my own perspective, having 5 children who are in school and needing to support them in their schooling when schools had to shut, and at the same time working from home, that was a challenge. And I understand that because I'm in a position of authority, I'm also in a position of privilege. And to think about other women around the world who do not have the resources available to support their children it just shows that the current system and the system before the pandemic wasn't working for women. And that's something that we have to think about, and it's time to make a change. Why do we have to divide our work from our family life? That's not how we operate. That's not how we operated previously. And to think about women in history, when we think about our own Islamic history, where in the 10th century, more than 30% of scholars were women. And there's an interesting manuscript on the margins of it. A woman wrote that she was apologizing for any mistakes that she had made in the transcription because she was cradling her child while writing with her right hand. And these show that before the divide between work and life didn't really exist. And I think us trying to be more like men is not useful for the communities that we want to build and the role that we need to have in the lives of our children and supporting our communities. And of course, that doesn't just go for women, it also goes for men and the role that they have to play as fathers. And so I hope that today we take the time to reflect and understand what role we play as non-governmental organizations, as government, as private sector, in really changing the framework of work and understanding that it really wasn't working for women in the first place. When we talk about the gender pay gap, or we talk about maternity leave, these are things or topics that continuously come up, and it shows us that we haven't resolved that problem. And I think by trying to equate or put men and women on the same line is not really resolving the issue. And we need to have that flexibility and understand that even us as women, we're different mothers, we're different, even fathers are different, the way that they want to contribute or the way that they want to organize their lives. And so we have to be able to have that flexibility, and it's important for us to really understand that the impact of women not being involved in the children's lives and not being involved in their own lives in a way that is productive and meaningful is going to destruct our communities in the future, and it's time to change it.
Could I just add on to what Sheikha Hind just said, because I think it's a really critical observation. Every person has a right to live up to his or her God-given potential. We want it for our children, both our boys and our girls. We want it for adults. But we make it really difficult for people to manage and integrate making a living and having a life. And of course, having a life, which includes family life, which includes, all of the joys and challenges of family life, at the end of the day is really the goal of it all. So I hope that what Her Excellency just said will be heard, because we impose a penalty on many women for trying to fulfill their own potential while also wanting to be wives and mothers and caregivers. And we need to figure out how to better organize our societies and our economies so that more people, particularly more women, have a chance both to fulfill their own aspirations, but equally, if not more importantly, to fulfill their personal goals and desires of being embedded in a family and a community.
You're so right, both of you. This topic is so critically important, and that struggle for balance in our lives. So thank you for touching on it so eloquently. I want to turn to education because the pandemic has also had a very negative impact on education. We've seen in many countries great progress for girls who've been marginalized in the past, where they're now in school, but as a result of the pandemic and the lockdowns that Her Excellency mentioned, they have been out of school trying to help their families. And in the process, many are now the victims of abuse, trafficking, child marriage, and other problems. And there's great worry that they will not return to school. Maybe again, I could start with you, Secretary Clinton, because I know you focused so much on these kinds of issues in the past, and to hear how we might now resolve again in Building Back Better to ensure that we won't have this huge deficit to the girls, to our countries, to our economies, with their not returning to school.
Well, I worry about that a lot for all of the reasons that you just mentioned. There are a lot of reports that we're now seeing from around the world that because of schools shutting down, girls are not only out of school, but there's some doubt as to whether, depending upon their age, they will be returned to school or perhaps put to work or perhaps married. And we also have discovered the great digital divide in many countries where the effort to try to sustain learning through virtual learning was less than successful in many places because the children didn't have access to the kind of technology and internet access that they needed. So we have uncovered some very serious issues. Plus, as Her Excellency pointed out, a lot of mothers and some fathers were having to become teachers in the home, having to supervise the schoolwork. I've had many people say to me, I really now for the first time understand how hard a teacher works, because keeping their attention, keeping them on task, keeping them learning was not an easy undertaking. So I do think that as schools reopen, whether they're open now or aiming to reopen in the fall, every precaution should be taken, because we know most young children will not have been vaccinated by then. So we still have to be, sufficiently protective of them. But every precaution should be taken to try to get children back into school, back into the actual classroom. And I think that communities now understand how much more they need to support education. And I think it's a great example that we have from Qatar about the way that education has really been emphasized there. So I would love to hear from Her Excellency, because she truly is an expert in education and has helped to really make possible what Qatar has achieved.
So Your Excellency, maybe you can take up right now the Secretary's question, because we're all so familiar with the extraordinary work your country has done and the foundation has done on education. And I wonder if you could speak more broadly about this commitment and this priority. I'm very familiar with Education City, so it has affected all of us in many ways.
Absolutely. The fact that our country has valued education is the very reason why we see the drastic enhancement in education, and we see the value that people put in education as well. Now, with the pandemic, there are many lessons learned, and some of them are positive, but of course some of them are negative. During this time, we've done a lot of research to understand what has worked and what are the things that schools did really well prior to the pandemic that we've missed out on. So again, speaking as a mother, I noticed that my children socially were affected because the spontaneous, playground conversations that they would have were completely taken away. But at the same time, we know through studies that bullying, which affected academic achievements in some students, because that was extracted, their academic achievements were enhanced. And so understanding how to create an environment for learning post-pandemic will be important to ensure what worked prior and during the pandemic. And at the same time, I would like to also add that one thing I noticed in my own children is a sense of calm, because I was around them more. And so again, understanding how to allow parents to be part of the school culture and building that community around the school is critical. We shouldn't think of schools as institutions taken away from family life. If anything, it should be completely incorporated in our family life, because it's important for us to understand how our children are doing and to feel like we're part of that community as well, because parents have to be engaged in their children's education. Otherwise, they miss out, not only parents, but also the children. And so how can we build these communities in our schools and in our country to ensure that the learning opportunities for our kids continue and they don't stop at the gates of the school?
Thank you for that wisdom also. And let me just turn quickly as the clock winds down to probably the existential threat of our time, climate change. It's having terrible impacts that we're already seeing. And we know that women who are at the socioeconomic levels that many are, those margins in many places, are already losing their livelihoods. Displacement is becoming an issue. What can we do collectively to ensure that we don't view women, particularly in places that are already hard hit, just as victims, but see them as problem solvers? And just generally, how can we engage more in ensuring that access to the kinds of tools that they will need to lead a better life despite this terrible challenge?
Well,
Secretary
Milan,
Clinton, you start.
I'm actually encouraged because more and more women, particularly young women, are becoming very active and outspoken about the threat of climate change. I had the opportunity just last week to speak with Greta Thunberg and two other young climate activists about the work that they are doing to try to not only raise visibility, but to persuade decision makers in every government in the world, as well as in the boardrooms of corporations, to take this threat seriously, because of course, they're the ones who will live through the most dire consequences of what climate change can bring. And I think a lot of women around the world have been emboldened, even enlisted to be more active. I think about the late Nobel Peace Prize winner, Wangari Maathai, who pioneered the planting of trees in Africa. And, when she started, people didn't know what she was really trying to do. And she enlisted, legions of women across parts of Africa to plant trees, because she knew that it was one way that she could very visibly take a stand against climate change. Well, there are so many other ways that all of us can do something. And I think that it's important to listen to young people about this, because in my observation over the last years, they seem to really understand deeply in their hearts why this issue is an existential issue. And particularly if you go to parts of the world that are already suffering from rising sea levels or increased frequency and intensity of storms, there's just a growing awareness that this really may be our last chance. And I was very pleased and grateful that President Biden made sure the United States went back into the Paris Accord, that there will be some important meetings this year to try to figure out what countries can and will do. So I hope that, there is a growing global commitment to trying to do what we can do and do it in a smart way so that, economic opportunities are still readily available through mitigation, through new forms of energy and all of the other aspects of a sensible global climate policy. But clearly, time is of the essence, and there needs to be increased awareness and attention and action paid to it.
And Your Excellency, I know that the foundation has made science and the environment research very clear priorities. I wonder what you could convey to us about how you see the need for all of us to be engaged in accelerating progress on addressing climate change.
Yeah, so we've invested a lot in research when it comes to sustainability and climate change, and it's very heartening to see young girls and young boys taking on that challenge and knowing that it's also their responsibility to protect the earth. Right now, I feel like there's a values imbalance in society. It seems like those who can get the most are those who are on top. And we need to change that. We need to instill values, not just in our children, but even in ourselves, to understand that it's not about what you can get, but what you need to get, what's enough. And understanding that it's also not an individualistic act. We come from communities, we're born into communities, and we need to protect these communities. And we can't do so if we think of ourselves and only ourselves. And so it's not only on individuals, of course, it's on corporations, it's on government to understand we need to be satisfied with getting as much as we need as opposed to as much as we can get. I'm optimistic that the younger generation understand that fully. And it's on us to ensure that that's a sign of success for them as well. That success is not associated with the most money you can get, but actually it's about looking after your community or protecting the earth. And I know we're in an economic forum, and it's important for us to think about even rethinking the way we think about a successful economy. It will, of course, take generations, but the best time to do it is now, and we need to start somewhere. And the most important thing really is to look at those values and make sure that they're integrated within our lives.
Your Excellency, how do we, with the youth bulge, the large numbers of young people comprising the majority in some countries, particularly in the region, and there's great worry about how they will become employed and be productive and realize their potential. How can we ensure that they will be valued as a great resource and not worry about them as a problem?
I mean, it all starts with education. We need to give them access to quality education, and we need to make sure that we support them with the tools so that they don't have to, be employed in the government or seek a job in a company, but they can be entrepreneurs, and that has to be supported as well. The youth, to me, is a huge opportunity for development. They have the passion that we need, and of course, we need to couple it with the wisdom of the older generation. And the older generation need to understand how to use that passion to ensure that we continue to develop and we continue as a society to understand better how we can enhance the lives of everyone. So I'm not too concerned about the number of the young population, but of course we have to ensure that they've got these opportunities in place and we support them as much as we can.
We have just a little bit over a minute left, and I wonder if I could ask each of you, both of you, what makes you optimistic? Our world is challenged in so many ways, and certainly economies are challenged, but what makes you optimistic? Secretary Clinton.
Well, Milan, I would say three things. Number one, what both Her Excellency and I have talked about, young people, I really do feel like there is a generation of doers and activists and caring people that we can see going into the future. Secondly, science, facts, evidence. The way that the world, with its scientific know-how, came up with vaccines that are helping to stop this pandemic is extremely beneficial. And then finally, I think that there is a lot of serious rethinking going on. People are trying to ask themselves, and as Her Excellency said, how do we want to live coming out of this pandemic? I think that's a really fruitful, hopeful, optimistic conversation, and I hope we see some results from it.
Your Excellency?
Well, seeing the number of women having bachelor's degree all around the world continue to increase, that's incredibly important. And it shows us that the more women are going to be active in the workplace, which means that their narrative is going to be part of that. And they will try to change that and change the framework that we're currently operating in. And of course, the youth and seeing all the global social movements happening, it's incredible. And I hope to see that translate into real action by those who are in positions of authority.
Well, thank you both for an extraordinary conversation, for the wisdom that's been imparted here. And to both of you, thank you for all you do and for what you continue to do.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You know her, of course, as the former CEO of Xerox. She's on multiple boards. She is a senior advisor at Teneo. She is shaking up the world of private equity, and she's also just released her own memoir. Where You Are is Not Who You Are. It is, of course, Ursula Burns. The book you have written, it stirs something. The story, you are like the encapsulation of an American dream, really, coming from poverty, describing what that felt like, what that smelt like, what it looked like, and then to reach the highest echelons of power within business. Are the recipes there for more people to follow in your footsteps in America at the moment?
I think that the recipes are there. I don't believe that we're mixing with the right levels yet, but at least we have the ingredients present. And the only reason why I'm a little bit more cautious than I would have normally been is because the pandemic has taken its toll, and I think has taken years off of progress. So taken years away from the progress that we've made. But it also ignited some accelerants as well, which is good. So maybe we are slowed down a little bit, maybe not as fast. Maybe we have to get more people that have been left behind moving forward. But I think that the ingredients are there. We have to focus on the level and the mix of the ingredients. And we have to focus on just keeping continuous feedback loops. You know, this thing, you know, learn, do, and then act again. So you act, you learn, you do it again, and so on, so on. That is really an important set of things. But I am convinced that we have the start of something that's going to be exciting for the world's future.
Talk to us about your feedback loop. I mean, your memoir goes into really what helped catapult you, the story of your mother, what a force she was in driving you forward, wanting you to get outside of your neighborhood into a better place, you write it as, but also some of the impediments that you saw that, I mean, teach us the fact that one school, one university you wanted to go to said, look, you've got to swim a lap of a pool. And well, that's not something that inner city kids did. Are we starting to break out of those hidden frictions that stop people of color or people from lower incomes being able to climb in the way that they should?
Yes, we are. Not fast enough. Some of this stuff is hidden. Some of it is purposely obscured. But, you know, the social media, technology, word of mouth, whatever it is making it less and less possible for you to be deceitful. If you get my drift, not that these places were necessarily deceitful, but non-transparent. So I do believe that there is progress here, but something as simple as when I was going to college, this requirement that you swim a lap, before I even spoke to anyone, I looked at the school and said, well, I'm not even going to apply there. I don't swim. didn't think it was important that I learned how to swim, but also reflected that it was maybe my fault that I didn't swim. So I think all of that has to be eliminated for like freedom of grasping opportunities to be fully enacted. Little things like that seem like they're small. People are like, oh, don't worry about it. But think about what you are up against when you are coming out of an environment that doesn't have a lot of examples, that you don't have money, et cetera, and you read quickly. Oh, and by the way, you have to be able to swim a lap. And you're like, oh my God, that's just another, that's the needle that broke the back of the camel. And I think it's really, really, really important that we actually keep looking for these minor things and eliminating them. The one reason why I bring it up is for that reason. These minor things are minor to you and me now, but they are not minor to people who are pulling themselves up every single day.
What about those minor things within the corporate world? You're a woman who's trying to look at board diversity in particular and how that can be brought to bear. And if you can't see it, you can't be it element. But how are you finding that as companies, the role of capitalism in ensuring we iron out these minor things to not become huge?
Yeah, businesses, I think this is a place, particularly public and publicly traded companies, where we're having a crescendo of different activities coming together into something that's not noise, but music, right? So there is a push everywhere for opening up boardrooms and the C-suite to diversity. That diversity is largely focused on white women right now. They are making progress faster than any other group. By the way, I say hooray, but I also say be careful here, right? White is one of the, women is one of the problems. White is the other problem. So if you fixed a white woman problem, you have not fixed the diversity problem, because Black and Black female, brown females are still excluded. That's harder, because that's in the heart and soul of people's, and in the minds, in the back of their minds from a bias perspective, right? Race is a very distinct problem to gender. We haven't gotten there if all we do is make a whole bunch of white women CEOs and a whole bunch of white women board members. So that's number one. Number two, we know, public companies as well, we know we can find out facts and data about them. You can look in the annual report. Hopefully they have pictures. You can count the number of people. So consumers, community leaders, government, anybody can find out information about them. And we should be able to do that, which we're trying to do. They should make it easier. That's one of the things we call for. We shouldn't have to look at every book. They should tell us what their diversity looks like. But we can at least find it out. The bigger issue and a rising issue is the wealth that's created, the power that's created, the new companies that are created, generally tech companies, in the PE and VC world that we have very little data on. There is no tracking, there is no counting, there is no measuring. They are essentially private. And this is something that we're spending a lot of time focusing on, because if you think about that, they launch into Facebook and Apple and Amazon, et cetera. And if they launch incorrectly, and Uber, they launch incorrectly, guess what? We have to fix it down before we can actually start to make progress. It's really important that we understand what's happening there as well.
You're a global woman. You're a woman who has been living in London. You're now coming back to America with signs of optimism. I'm interested in, as you ran a global business, and we're speaking at a global forum here, Middle East, Asia, Europe, the US, are there areas where are getting it right from your perspective?
I think the UK, Europe is making significant progress, and in many ways leading the conversation here. I know that the Americans don't want to hear that, but in ESG in general, and in board diversity from a gender perspective, they've said, listen, we're going to enact rules. We're going to actually tell you what we want to hear. We're going to tell you how many people we think should be there. They have made it unavoidable to kind of comply, without some negative action. So I think that there are places outside of the United States that are absolutely leading the way and are setting an example for the US and other parts of the world to actually engage. I do believe that there are other places that they're falling well behind. People of color in these countries, in Europe in particular, is one that's kind of silent. Again, this is people of color and specifically women of color. I understand the complexities of accounting, but that can't be an excuse. You can't say we can't count, therefore. So that's an area, I won't go too deeply into that. And then gender around the world, I know it's tied up with a lot of tradition and religion and et cetera, but half of the world, everywhere you go in the world, is women, and having them actionably excluded from participating broadly in the economy is not a very good thing. And there's work that has to be done there. I don't believe all the approaches can be done like the US or even like Western Europe, but we have to, every country has to look at being more inclusive and set their targets, goals, et cetera, to their population and to the world.
Ursula, I've had the great fortune in getting to know you, but reading your book told me so much more about you, where you came from, what drives you. But what many might not know is, of course, that you left the US because you almost despaired of where the country, the direction it was going. That was hard for you, away from your family, particularly in a time of COVID. You've now come back. What does that say about you? What does it say about America right now?
Yeah, so I left exasperated and demoralized. I must say, it wasn't about only the president that we had elected and his vitriol. It was the fact that we elected him as a nation, and at what state we must have been in. And I left kind of in a huff. I moved to the UK. I had lived there before. I love the UK. They have their own problems. This is not an ideal place. Don't get me, it's nothing like that. I needed, myself and my husband needed to exhale from the election. So we left immediately after the election in 2017, January of 2017. We got there February. What I saw over the next 4 years was, oh my God, I'm so happy I left. I was relatively fragile, and then my husband died in 2019. I needed a place where my brain could rest. Fortunately, the country kind of came around and were more inclusive in their messaging, and we have a new president, new administration, but a new voice, a new hope. And so I'm still going to be in London a lot of time, but I am back here in the United States, in New York, a lot more than I have ever been in the last 5 years, and I'm happy that that's an opportunity for me going forward. I feel a little guilty leaving because it was almost like leaving a burning ship. But I was very active, as you guys know, probably know, I was very active in Europe, in the UK, and in Amsterdam, where I lived, back here in the United States. But it's nothing like being here and feeling like a citizen again.
Ursula, very selfishly, as I'm based in New York, I'm really happy to have you back here too.
Thank you.
I want to thank you so much for your time and really always enjoy the messages that you share. Come do it again. Thank you.
Caroline, you are phenomenal. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jan Bratanic, and today we will be talking to Her Excellency Atifete Yahyaga, former President of Kosovo. Your Excellency, welcome. Well, summer is here and people have already made plans for holidays like yourself. Are Balkan states ready for reopening of the borders? Will that exact the price come autumn?
Thank you, Jan. It is a pleasure to be a part of this outstanding conference. Well, yes, we are reopening the borders and the economy in part because all the states in the region have begun the massive vaccination campaigns. They have secured vaccines, and generally there is a better understanding on how to manage any outbreak in cases. There is also a better testing in place, and many of those traveling from Western Europe, where we have a large diaspora, have already been vaccinated. There is also an urgency to reopen the economy, especially the countries that depend a lot on tourism, such as Croatia, Montenegro, and Albania. And most of the region, as you already know, has suffered from a great economic contraction. So it's also very important that we are aware of that, but at the same time, to continue to keep the public health situation under the control.
Mm. Well, the governments in the region have had mixed results in their fight against COVID. For instance, Kosovo government fell partly also because of the virus. What do you think the region has learned from the pandemic?
Jan, yes, for many countries around the world, even those more resourceful and more developed than the Balkans, the COVID-19 presented an unprecedented crisis. It tested our national emergency preparation, it challenged our health system, it brought our economies to halt, and most importantly, it had touched us all personally and profoundly. The one big lessons we have all learned, whether you are in Pristina, London, New York, or Doha, we are all interdependent and heavily reliant on wealthier and more developed nations, as well as our multilateral organization to lead the way in helping us weather this crisis. And having said that, it was a wake-up call for everyone. In places like Balkans, and more specifically in the country like Kosovo, our resources are limited, but the COVID-19 crisis has served as a reminder that we need to prioritize our health and emergency planning at the same time.
But while the EU has been focusing on the virus, the EU enlargement process has stalled. Have the countries in the region done enough to join the Union, in your view?
Well, it's not secret that the European Union is going through its own crisis, and for the region, membership in the EU has, to put it bluntly, became a moving target. But we are encouraged that countries such as Albania and Northern Macedonia have taken reforms required by the EU as crucial to their own improvements. And even though membership might still be off, it is without a doubt a beneficial process that everyone involved to not only adopt necessary laws, but also to implement them. And fortunately, in these past few years, there has been democratic backsliding in the region, as well as autocratic tendencies. EU candidate states such as Serbia are more prone to adopt and implement the illiberal policies than embrace the reforms. So having said that, the region needs another push to embrace democratic reforms and liberal values as the core guiding principles. This push means more clarity from the EU so that the membership becomes the goal. And it's not only about the processes. And the danger of this process dragging on will cement nationalistic forces, the very same ones that have thrown it into recession into the last 3 decades.
So you would say that nationalist tendencies, or a danger of being a small player in a geopolitical world, are the main dangers of, for instance, Kosovo vying away from the EU path?
Well, if there is not a quick process of the acceleration towards the EU perspective, then the danger is quite accurate to this trend.
You mentioned Serbia before, and Serbia and Kosovo remain at odds. It seems they didn't make any progress in recent talks in Brussels. What must happen for their relationships to mend?
Well, Jan, it's pretty simple. Serbia needs to recognize Kosovo's independence. It needs simply to let Kosovo go. The encouraging fact is that there is an ongoing dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia, but an endless dialogue serves nobody and serves nobody. Currently, the EU-mediated dialogue has no end goal and no time frame, and two sides that have drifted further away from reaching an agreement.
Well, Republic of Kosovo is recognized as an independent state, but by more than 100 countries across the world. How is the recognition campaign going on, and how do you comment on Serbian efforts to undo what Pristina has done so far?
Kosovo has achieved much progress in consolidating itself internationally. It is recognized by over 100 countries around the world. And unfortunately, Kosovo is also tangled up in the geopolitical complexities beyond its control. Countries that have not recognized Kosovo rarely have issues with what Kosovo is or what Kosovo has become. It is simply about their domestic disputes and geopolitical considerations. And as I said earlier, Serbia has a chance and should have a chance to open a new chapter in our relations and our future. Kosovo's independence is irreversible, and we are here to stay. When Serbia decides to recognize this reality, it will free the entire region, the whole region and itself, and we truly unleash our potential as the region in general.
Your Excellency, thank you for taking the time to talk to us. Bye.
It was my pleasure.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. An Arabic proverb says, رُبَّ ضارة نافعة, which means something could have been bad for you turned out to be good. The roller coaster of feeling in the past 18 months had showed us a good thing can come out of the most difficult of situations. Technology saved us as well in this month, but also made us think, what if the world goes digital from now on? In fact, the digitalization and flexible working arrangement enable more females participation and give many women the ability to start new jobs or businesses. Working from home made us work harder, yet made most of us happier. The government, led by His Highness Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, spared no effort to support the businesses community, which I am a member of. The economic and the financial program helped businesses that were hit hard by the pandemic, especially the SMEs. We at the Qatari Businesswomen Association are working a several initiatives to support women in our country, to help them build sustainable business models. We are working with our peers in the international community to create more opportunities. Collectively, we can minimize the negative impact of any challenge we face. Let me conclude with another Arabic proverb, "Fil haraka baraka," which means action is better than inaction. And in order to reach your goals, you need to act. You need to be effective. Thank you very much.
Sport, with its inherent tribalism, brings the world together, only for individuals to stand apart. Emerging from the shadow of the pandemic, we look at how the 2022 FIFA World Cup Qatar will create a lasting legacy for a fractured world. Here's Bloomberg's Simone Foxman.
We are here with His Excellency Hassan Al-Thawadi, the Secretary General of the Supreme Committee for Delivery and Legacy, essentially one of the key players in preparing Qatar for the 2022 World Cup. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
It's more than 500 days away still, but no matter what, we are going to be going to this World Cup in the shadow of COVID-19. How does the World Cup look in this circumstance, in the midst of a pandemic?
How different? I mean, well, to start off with, the World Cup itself, apart from COVID, in itself is a very unique World Cup. It's the first time that this World Cup is in the Middle East and an Arab world. It's a compact World Cup, which means that fans will be able to see more than one match a day. Players will be able to stay in one place rather than traveling and so on. Actually, the World Cup before that was in Russia. the one that's coming, big distances, the one that's coming in the US, Canada, and Mexico. So in itself, the World Cup itself is unique, and I can explain that a little bit later. But you know, with COVID, I think this will be the opportunity potentially to be the first truly global event where everybody can come and hopefully celebrate together overcoming this pandemic. I mean, you're seeing now signs of a sense of normalcy coming back, obviously with a few of the, you know, a few obstacles coming along the way. But I think as the vaccine becomes more and more available, as more and more people are vaccinated, as teams are vaccinated, we're hoping that it will be, and we're optimistic that it will be the first truly global celebration in Qatar in 2022.
Yeah, well, vaccinations, it sounds like, are going to be pretty much mandatory for those who can receive them, I suppose.
I mean, as of yet, obviously, you know, every country's got its own restrictions, but I think it's a given from what you know, from everything that we've seen. I'm not a medical expert in this, but it's a given that vaccinations today seem to be the solution towards overcoming COVID. That's what it's. And if you see other tournaments, for example, today, you know, the Euros, for example, are playing as we speak right now. There's Copa America as well. The Common Ball in South America is being played right now as we're speaking, and in July there's the Gold Cup as well, and all of them have a form of COVID protocols being implemented.
How about masks?
I mean, again, I think with the advent of the vaccines, as we move along, I don't want to anticipate exactly what will be required. What I can tell you and assure you is one thing. Over the last year or so, we've been able to host major tournaments, major events, whether it was the West Asian Champions League, East Asian Champions League, the Champions League Finals, the Club World Cup, and many other events. We've implemented a robust COVID protocol that looked at a tracking and tracing system, looked at ensuring there's social distancing and so on. And we've been, let's say, at the avant-garde of COVID protocols to ensure that we host events, the progress continues, whether it's in terms of construction or otherwise, in a safe manner so that everybody involved, their health and well-being is our priority. So rest assured, when 2022 comes, we will be hosting a safe event, and we are optimistic that it will be the first major tournament where everybody who wants to attend will be able to attend and celebrate in Qatar.
Is there anything you're watching specifically from the Tokyo Olympics?
Our habit, our nature has been that, you know, since we've won the right to host the World Cup in 2010, we've always learned from every tournament. Every tournament.
But nothing in specifics, you know, I mean, you're watching it, you'll see what happens.
Well, I mean, absolutely. Well, you know, to add, we've got people in the Euros right now, so we've got people spread throughout Europe right now looking at the Euro tournaments and looking at the COVID protocols that they have over there, learning from their operational experiences. We've got people that will be in North America as well, in the United States during the Gold Cup. We're learning, obviously, from South America and Brazil right now with Common Ball, and there's no doubts that we'll be looking towards Tokyo and learning from what they have.
Back more than a decade ago now, when this tournament was initially envisioned, there was some talk that it would be sort of a Gulf event. Now that relations between Qatar and Saudi Arabia, the UAE in particular, are patched up, do you foresee, you know, fans traveling back and forth between those countries?
It was always a Gulf event. Just
well,
like
obviously, it couldn't have been if the embargo was ongoing.
You mean the blockade? But
Bloomberg
no,
style.
It was always a Gulf event. I mean, from ours, you know, from day one, when we had the intention to bid, and throughout the entire journey, we always said this was a Middle Eastern Arab tournament. You know, our first presence after we submitted our bid intention was actually in Beirut with the sports ministers, the Arab sports ministers, to submit the idea and the concept of the World Cup. And since then, it's never changed. During the blockade, we hosted the Gulf Cup, which is our local, regional tournament. We had fans coming in from Bahrain, we had fans coming in from Saudi Arabia, we had fans coming in. So our doors were always open, and it will always continue being open.
But do you expect, you know, tourists to spend a bunch of time maybe in Dubai and then fly over here? Is that actually a part of your hospitality, you know,
we
vision
always said
as well?
This tournament is an opportunity for building bridges. It's an opportunity for the outside world to know who we are, not only as Qataris, but essentially as the Middle East and the Arab world. It's an opportunity for people for the first time in their lives they'll be traveling to this region. They might have a preconceived notion of who we are. So this is the first time for them, and because truly the World Cup in football is one of the most widespread common denominators. If we're talking about people-to-people diplomacy, the ability to break down stereotypes, and for people to know each other on a personal basis, this is one of the most transformative opportunities, and we saw that in Russia. People had a preconception about Russia. They came, they experienced it, and they left. So there's no doubts that we hope that when people come to Qatar, experience the World Cup, experience what we have, but absolutely then be able to grasp this opportunity and get to know the region as well, absolutely.
Okay, well, let's talk about preconceptions about the region then, because I know that the single most frequent question that you're probably asked, you know, is, will there be alcohol? Obviously, there's alcohol served in five-star hotels here. I understand there are going to be fan zones. Do you see the expansion of the ability to perhaps purchase alcohol outside of what's currently available anymore between now and 2022?
Well, I mean, I think it's important to highlight. First, you know, as is known, alcohol is not part of our culture, but hospitality is part of our culture. And accordingly, we, you know, as you said, alcohol currently is available. We have been exploring opportunities and different models where we can, where alcohol will be available and served in certain designated areas. It will not be available freely in public, but it will be available in designated areas. And we've had a very successful live example of this concept when we hosted the 2019 World Cup.
But anything more from what you've already tried out?
Well, this is what I was going to say. In 2019, when we hosted the Club World Cup, we had fans coming in from Liverpool, from Mexico, from Brazil, and so on. And we had a designated fan zone area where alcohol was served. And it turned out to be quite a successful project. Now, of course, we will replicate this in certain areas so that whoever wants to have a drink will be able to have access to a drink. It will not be available on the streets or in public areas, but it will be available in designated areas. And for whoever wants to have a drink, it'll be readily available.
Okay, readily available. I want to understand as well, you know, in terms of the fan experience, sort of, this is a conservative country. What's your philosophy with respect to how modesty and behavior standards that normally exist here are going to be enforced, upheld when there are fans from different cultures here?
I think first it's important to highlight, this is not, you know, the state of Qatar has hosted many international tournaments. It has hosted many international conferences. So it's not, you know, we're very much accustomed to hosting people from different walks of life, from different backgrounds, from different parts of the world. And accordingly, we've all, you know, we're very, as I said, we're a very hospitable nation. Now, obviously, there are certain norms, you know, as we're a progressively conservative nation. There's, you know, public display of affection is something that's not part of our culture. And what we ask, and I think most host nations, the beauty of it is a host nation can showcase its culture to the outside world. And as is always, you know, when people visit, they always take into consideration the host nation's cultures and norms.
Okay.
Just to add one last element, but to ensure that that is, you know, to ensure that that's communicated. So what we've done, for example, I use the example of the 2019 Club World Cup because that's probably, you know, the best example. We engage with fans in Liverpool, we engage with Mexican fans, Brazilian fans. We, you know, as we engage, we communicated with them, and there was a lot of great lessons learned. One of them was communicating with the fans. Some of them have concerns. Some of them have specific concerns. Some of them have, you know, widespread concerns, either based on misconception or lack of knowledge. It is upon us as well to explain that, to make them feel comfortable. And accordingly, I think it's safe to say that most of the fans that came, it was probably, you know, a great experience, that they left with a desire to come back in 2022.
Woman shows up in shorts and a tank top to go to the mall. Does she get in during the World Cup, or is that? I
mean, these policies, you know, the malls are private institutions, so I can't really comment on that specific element.
Is the government going to go out to business owners, say, you know, give everyone a little slack?
Look, what I can tell you is this much, you know, the World Cup is an opportunity for celebration. And accordingly, everybody that will come will feel comfortable and feel welcome. And to the extent that there's, you know, we will make sure that everybody feels comfortable, everybody's here to celebrate, and everybody will enjoy the tournament.
Okay. How about violations? Things like public drunkenness, indecency, public displays of affection to a different level. I mean, are these things going to be handled in the Qatari courts, or will there be a new policy for?
I mean, I can't get into the details of it just because there's a plan put in place, and this is obviously a mandate within a certain section of the government that's looking into this. But what I want to do is alleviate the concern, right? Okay. Because the questions are coming out, and I sense, I might be mistaken, but I sense a sense of, let's say, uncertainty and maybe apprehension. But I keep saying again, we've had people living here for, again, people from different walks of life that have made Qatar their home. People from different backgrounds that have made Qatar their home over the last 20, 30, 40 years. We've hosted many major tournaments, major events. People have come here, and gradually tourism is gradually increasing as well, or let's say expanding. It's, this isn't an isolated country, and it's not a country that's not aware of other cultures and other norms. We are truly looking to welcome the world, and everybody that comes, I'm happy, I'm aware that everybody that's come has always wanted to come back, and everybody that's come has been excited for what 2022 will hold. And that's what the assurance that I want to provide people. And I want to provide yourself as well, and everybody else.
Well, I mean,
right. It's not something that we've hosted tournaments like,
But of course, this is a bigger scale.
Absolutely, but again,
and it draws criticism, like protests and things like that.
Absolutely,
and so,
absolutely.
So you guys are developing a plan, essentially.
No, we're developing a plan, but it's not as if it's coming out of a vacuum. We've had trade unions that have come and protested in Qatar. We've had NGOs coming and issuing their reports that have criticized certain elements or certain aspects. It's not. What I'm trying to say is it's not being done out of a vacuum, and we've developed throughout the years. And the one thing that I think people can attest to is that we have been, we're an open society. And everybody's, as I said, everybody's welcome. That's the only way that I can say it. And I keep on repeating it because it's important for the world to know. This is truly. For us, a very important opportunity to maybe, to a certain extent, dispel a lot of the inaccurate concerns that people have about Qatar, and not only about Qatar, but the region generally.
Two more things I want to get quickly through before we run out of time. One of the legacy bits that I know has been very important to you has been to try and give more freedoms to workers, particularly migrant workers, within the scope of the law reforms.
System, yes.
Anything more you want to see happen before the tournament?
I mean, look, it's very important to highlight one thing: the commitment and the progress that has happened over the last few years. And again, just to highlight where the progress is, today we are, I think, leading the region in terms of worker welfare reforms, in terms of legislation, and moving towards implementation. The Supreme Committee has made significant contribution towards the worker welfare reforms in a way where in certain areas we actually have created a global benchmark. So when it comes, for example, to recruitment fees, today I believe, if I'm not mistaken, we're second to Apple in ensuring remittances or recruitment fees are repaid to workers. That was all done out of a commitment and to our own values, to our own sense of to the strong belief that we have that everybody living in Qatar or contributing to the development of Qatar is treated with dignity. Their health and safety and security is of the utmost concern to us. Having said that, that means the progresses will continue. And it's not what needs to be done until the tournament. Rather, it is a continuous commitment to progress. Even after the tournament, progress will happen on this. I mean, again, as I've always said, there's not a single nation in the world today that can claim that they have the perfect labor system or the perfect worker welfare regime. And we're no different. Progress needs to be done. More work needs to be done. Implementation, learning from mistakes, learning from what works and what doesn't work, enhancing what works, reconfiguring what doesn't work, and moving forward on that.
I'll ask you a last one, and I'm going to get in trouble because we're going over time.
Please.
There's been lots of talk about using the World Cup to catalyze sports investment. How do you see that, just quickly?
Well, simply put, I mean, this is a major tournament. Obviously, major tournaments or international tournaments usually have a cascading effect on the economy on different sections, different sectors. Today, we anticipate the contribution to the economy essentially would be around about $20 billion, circa $20 billion.
Okay.
That's the assumption. Again, it's very high-level studies. Once the tournament ends, we'll be able to make a proper assessment. Significant portion goes towards the construction industry. Another portion goes towards tourism industry. And when we say that, obviously, there's a cascading effect there. We're talking about hospitality sector. We're talking about the transfer of knowledge in terms of hosting major events. And it's a catalyst towards the sports economy, no doubts about that. And when we're talking about that, we're talking about obviously sports technology, event management, hospitality management, and so on and so forth. So I think it all depends on how you utilize it. And what we're trying to do in the tournament, with the tournament, is try to utilize it. We've always said this is a tournament, it's a transformative tournament, but more importantly, it is not imposed on the country's development plans. Rather, it's meant to serve as an engine to push forward and accelerate a lot of the initiatives that the government has already committed to, already had planned, whether it's in terms of urban development or economic diversification.
But we love numbers here at Bloomberg. That $20 billion figure is a nice one to have.
Absolutely,
nice one to
but again, it's based on a very high-level study. It's based on a very high-level study. We will be confirming it. Obviously, once the tournament is over, we'll be able to actually look at the direct assessment and be able to break down the number even more.
Hassan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
His Excellency Hassan Al-Thawadi, the Secretary General of the Supreme Committee for Delivery and Legacy, key to the World Cup 2022.
Well, when we talk about the transformational power of sports, you have transformed his sport, the world of sports, and now the world of investments and business more than David Beckham. David, really nice to have you with me virtually, at least. You look great. How's life right now? What's life like for you?
Life's pretty busy, I must admit, which I'm very thankful for. Obviously, there's a lot going on, obviously in London for me, and obviously in the States as well. Obviously I've been in Miami for the last 4.5–5 months, which I was very happy about and excited about, because obviously we've changed a few things within the team in Miami, and obviously bringing in the new coach and a new GM, and a lot of things changing there. So it was a good time to be there, to spend the amount of time that I did every single day in the club, working with the backroom staff, working with the players, working with our new coach, and obviously our new GM, Chris Henderson. And it was great to spend some time there. And then obviously heading back to the UK and being back in London now, and working on the business side and working with my team. So yeah, there's a lot going on. So I'm very thankful for that. But yeah, and the sun's out in London, so that makes a change.
So we're going to talk about lots of different things, but given who is convening us, let's talk a little bit about the World Cup if we can, because you have the perspective that you do. The long march has begun toward Qatar next year, folks starting to qualify. What is it about the World Cup that galvanizes the world the way that it does? You have been there. You understand it as well as anyone.
I think it's the general power of sport and the power of this game. Obviously football, soccer has been the biggest game, biggest sport in the world for a long, long time. And it unites and unifies people in a way that probably nothing does. I think that sport does that in general, and I think that that's why I'm personally so lucky to have played a game that I've loved for so many years and since I was a baby. And I was lucky to be part of that and be a professional in that for a number of years. But I've also been really lucky to have played in 3 World Cups. I could have played in 4, but I got obviously injured. But, to have been part of a World Cup, as a young kid dreaming of playing on the same stage as these great countries and these great players, that was my dream as a kid, to represent my country and to hopefully play in a World Cup, and I was lucky enough to have done that. So I've seen how this sport unifies people, unites people. It doesn't matter where you are in the world, it doesn't matter whether you speak that language. As soon as you're either on a football pitch, on a soccer pitch, in the stands. You know, there's something about this sport that just unites people in a way that nothing does. And it brings people together, you know, and I think that that's one of the things that I've always said about soccer, about sport, you know, being around the Olympics, being around World Cups. I've seen the way it changes people's lives, no matter what the world is going through, no matter what individuals are going through. When you're watching a soccer game, when you're watching the Olympics, nothing else matters for that amount of time, and that's why sport is so strong.
Yeah. And so let's take it back down to where you started, which is Miami, and sort of what you're doing there and how you sort of take your experience as a player. And now, as you alluded to, you're really rolling up your sleeves with this club. I mean, this is your life's work at the moment, at least. I mean, talk about being focused. Help me understand where the club and maybe where MLS is, because again, that's a journey you've been on from a player now to an owner and an executive.
I must admit, it's been an incredible journey. It's been longer than I ever expected it to be and to take, to bring our team in Miami into the league. And it's taken a lot of hard work. It's taken a lot of stubbornness, which apparently I'm pretty stubborn, so my wife tells me. So it's taken a lot of hard work, but I knew the moment that I started my journey in the US, in the MLS with the LA Galaxy, I knew once I stepped away from the game that was where my legacy lied in the sport in the US and globally, because I always believe that, you know, the MLS is a league that is growing, and I wanted to be part of that. Back in 2007 when I joined, I saw that it wasn't a challenge, because I saw that there was real ambition within the league, with Don Garber, with the people that were involved, to grow this league and to make it one of the strongest leagues in the world. And it has a real chance, and there's real opportunity there. You know, we've seen over the years the amount of teams and franchises that have come into this league. We've seen the players that have joined this league, and there's still work to be done, but we've seen the numbers that are put with the franchises now, the numbers of how much these franchises are worth now, it's grown so dramatically in the last 5 to 10 years that it has a real opportunity. But the opportunity lies actually within the academy systems. That's what we want to produce. That's what we want to focus in. My focus within Inter Miami, yes, obviously we want a challenge on the field in the MLS on the big stage, but more importantly from me, from day one, the academy is such an important part of that, and that's what I really focus on, because I want to be able to produce young players from Miami, South Florida, and all over the league. You know, every team wants to produce young, talented kids that come through their system into the MLS, and then who knows, they go on and play for their countries, and that's the real opportunity. So it's been an incredible journey, and of course we're still evolving. We're still a young team, we're a young franchise, so we're still learning, but we want to evolve quicker than, you know, than expected. So I honestly feel that the MLS is now being talked about all over Europe, and it has been for a number of years, and globally. And also, when I've traveled to certain places in Asia, wherever I've traveled to certain places in Europe, I see people walking down the street in a Miami jersey. I see people talking to me about Miami and saying, oh, we watched the game last night. So there is real interest globally in our team, but there's also real interest globally of the league. So, you know, it's moved on very quickly.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting to hear you talk about that decision, because it was not an obvious one in 2007. And I think there's a parallel, I dare say, and keep me honest here, with your business ventures as well. You zigged in some ways when others zagged, or zagged when others zigged, however you want to put it, in the sense that historically, former athletes at the end of their playing careers tended to, you know, slap their names on a few things and take in some endorsements. You've chosen a more active path as really an owner, and not just in the sport, but I'm thinking about things you've done with electric cars, with CBD, with esports even. Why is that? What was that decision for you to be an owner rather than an endorser?
Well, I think, I've been very lucky to have had the career that I've had, to have played for the clubs that I've played for, to have played in the cities and the countries that I've played in, and obviously have also been successful as well. So I think that really I take into my business world. And I think I'm very lucky. I've been part of some great teams over the years, and I also have now a great team within my business. But that wasn't just luck. That was obviously something that I built, 5 years out from retiring, and that for me was an important part of my decisions going forward. When I moved to the MLS and I was 31 years old, I was a Real Madrid player, and people were critical maybe of that decision, but I realised that yes, I'd played for Manchester United, I'd played for Real Madrid, I was moving as a Real Madrid player to play in a league that wasn't fully established at that point, but there was a real potential and opportunity there, and it wasn't just on the field, which my head automatically says I want to be successful, I want to win trophies for the LA Galaxy, but more importantly, there was a bigger role as an ambassador for the league and for the sport in that country as well, in the US, and that's what really interested me. Yes, firstly, I wanted to win championships with the Galaxy, but then I wanted to be able to grow the sport, and I think that that's the same in my business world as well. There are lots of opportunities, thankfully, that come into the office, that come into the team, that come to me. And it's about making the right decisions, and I have people around me and good people around me that help me make those right decisions. And yes, like you've said, whether it's Lunas, obviously the electric car business that we've invested in, whether it's obviously the CBD, whether it's other things that we've gone into. We're making these decisions because I've got a lot of good people around me that that are working with me on this, and I'm very lucky within the business, but it's come through hard work. And the way I look at my business is I'm the first in the morning, I am the last to leave the office at night, and that's how I was as a player. As a player, I was first in, I worked hard, I was last to leave, and I got that from Sir Alex Ferguson. He was a manager that had been part of my life for a long time, but I also got that from my parents. My mum and dad were working class, they worked hard, they still work now, so it was instilled in me from a very young age, and I was lucky that I joined a club with a coach that was like that. I then took that into my business, and I also have a team around me in the UK that also have that work ethic as well. So we're making the right decisions, hopefully, and doing the right things. But it also has to be enjoyable. I like to enjoy what I'm involved in, and that's what we do.
And it's interesting, and I would think you would find it interesting too, that this next generation of players, maybe even the next two generations of players, this is a given in many ways, that they will build businesses around themselves. But that wasn't necessarily assumed when you came up. Is that fair to say?
100%. Obviously, I was making decisions probably when I was playing that people were looking at and saying, even probably my dad was looking at, me, but doing the odd, photo shoot for GQ or the odd photo shoot for Vogue and saying, yeah, but you're a footballer. So, but I was making these decisions, not just because there was opportunities coming to me, and actually I enjoyed doing those kind of things, as long as it didn't affect my playing career, as long as it didn't affect me on the pitch, then that was okay to do. But what I love about this next generation of players is, we talk about obviously the social media, we talk about how important having a voice and being able to make these changes in the sports world, in the world in general. These players like Marcus Rashford, like Raheem Sterling, I think what they've done in the last 12 to 18 months has been incredible. They're using their their fame, they're using their voice to change people's perspectives. And that's what I love about what they've been doing. You know, obviously, you know, a good friend of mine in LA now, you know, LeBron. You know, LeBron is using his real voice to change people and to help communities. And that's what I love about this next generation of sportsmen. You know, they're really using their kind of power to change.
Well, and it feels like fans are emboldened by that in many ways and are drawn to players who do that. And yes, people root for their teams, and I think you see this in your travels, increasingly they're attaching themselves to players who reflect the beliefs, their own belief systems in some ways.
Without a doubt, and that's why sport is so powerful. You know, we talk about it all the time. We talk about, obviously, the things that have happened over the last few months. You know, you talk about the Super League. You know, I'm not a politician. I don't like to talk about politics. You know, and when I talk about the game, when I talk about sport, I come at it as a fan. You know, I've been a fan since I can remember, from 4 or 5 years old of sports and soccer. So I come at this particular subject as a fan. And when I see things that go on in the sport, I talk about it like I'm talking from a fan's perspective. And I think that as proof of what has happened over the last year, you know, when we don't see fans in the stand, when we don't see people, whether they're shouting for or against sportsmen, that has been missed. And that's why, you know, any decision going forward about, you know, whether it's a Super League, whether it's other leagues, whether it's things that happen in sports, that's why we've realised how important, and I knew this anyway as a ex-soccer player and as a fan, I know how important it is to have fans in the stadium and supporting. And that's why these decisions that get made in sport are so critical, because it changes people's lives and it changes people's perspective. And in sports and in competitions, you want a fair competition. Simple as that. You want to be able to get into a competition on merit, not just because, you know, you're whatever club it is around the world. You know, you want to be there on merit. You want to be in the final of the Champions League on merit. You want to win the Champions League on merit. And I think that's what is important to really talk about.
Well, listen, I could talk to you all day about football and about business. David Beckham, what a success story. I can't wait to catch up with you more. Thank you so much for your time. It's really been a pleasure.
Likewise. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. We are very lucky to have probably one of the greatest football players ever that has played the game. He was a striker, and he is the guy that's the sharp dress guy. That's not me. This is Didier Drogba, who played a magnificent career. First of all, Didier, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Michael.
I want to start real quick. You've had such a brilliant career. You played the game extremely well. But what one memory sticks out in your mind? And I have an idea the word is going to be Chelsea.
Well, actually, it's a different moment. It's not lifting the Champions League final in 2012. It's a memory with my national team when we qualified for the first time of the country history for a World Cup in 2006, for the World Cup in Germany. And after that, the speech we did for peace, ceasefire in our country was, I think, it's the best trophy for us, for me. It's the best achievement of my career.
You have taken that career, that brilliant career, and moved it to just something that is awesome. You are now a vice president and peace and sport. What is that, if you can tell the audience?
So Peace and Sport, Michael, is an international, neutral, and independent organization based in Monaco. which promotes peace using the power of sports. And it's founded in 2007 by the modern pentathlon Olympic medalist and world champion, Joël Bouzou. And we really enjoy the high patronage of His Highness, the Prince Albert II of Monaco. So Peace and Sport brings together and develops partnerships between the peace, so NGOs, UN agency, and academies, the sport, like the Olympic families, the international federations, and the political world. So it allows to implement and ensure the sustainability of field programs, maximizing the use of sport and for development and peace and leading social transformation in areas, in different areas of the world affected by poverty or social instability.
It's a very brilliant organization, and you're bringing communities together, as you said. It's awesome. The organization itself. Now, it's not just for the American audience, soccer, football. There are other sports involved as well with the organization. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, there are. Like we have so many sports. We have different athletes. We have the Champions for Peace that we call them Champions for Peace. So they come from athleticism, they come from rugby, they come from football, from different sports. So it's not only football specific. It's all kind of sports that exist in the world, and we bring the champions together.
You go through a challenge which is brilliant, especially in this political world. This organization navigates all through that, and you are helping to bring peace in the world. That's got to be a great feeling.
Yeah, thank you. Because peace and sport has been raising awareness among UN bodies and leading international organizations on decisive role of sport, in building peace and a peaceful and inclusive societies. We are one of the essential consultative bodies on the subject, particularly with the Council of Europe and with UNESCO. And for example, during the first World Cup, the World Refugee Forum, sorry, still talking about football, but during the first World Refugee Forum, organized by the UN in December 2019 in Geneva, Peace and Sport, we contributed to bringing together nearly 80 organizations.
Talk about the pillars of peace and sport, because if I read it right, it's mobilize, connect, demonstrate, and advocate. Can you take us through each of those pillars and what that means for the organization?
Yeah, this is exactly what we are doing as Peace and Sport. We like to mobilize, so bringing the athletes and, for example, Blaise Matuidi, world champion, Sia Kolisi, my brother, Sia Kolisi, Paula Radcliffe, Chris Froome, Laura Flessel, Christian Carambeau, and lately, like I said, Lionel Messi. So this is how we bring people together. And by the way, we organize an event every year, bringing 119 top athletes together, to make sport a tool for that social cohesion.
Take us through the ambassadors, because you mentioned it briefly, but Monaco has been a huge supporter of this organization.
Yes, like I said, we organize every year this award ceremony where we give some awards to the champions, and we promote all the programs that we've been doing. So we represent over 38 countries, you know, and Olympic and non-Olympic sports. We really invest our time, our celebrity, and our experience as athletes into projects that use sport to provide solutions to social issues.
I assume, just like everybody else in the world, you've had to negotiate through COVID. What challenges did that bring for you and the organization?
Well, the biggest, I think, organization for the biggest challenges, for us during this COVID is how to function. We needed to adapt, you know, an organization that was really going on the ground, traveling to create some events in Jordan, for example, and so it has been a significant challenge for us, but we managed to adapt to the conditions and to switch and bring the methodology into the Peace and Sport by my coach mobile application, which is new, and we are really proud of this. And this was at the start of the health crisis, and this allows us to continue certain field programs in the context of really difficult and severe restrictions on mobility. And in the coming years, we'd like to really diversify our partnership and collaborate with more private partners and develop this.
Can I give a shout out to you right quick? We got about a minute to go, but you just recently got an honorary degree, and not only for your work on the field, but also you helped to bring peace to your area. What kind of feeling was that?
Thank you. It's a big honor for me because obviously I've had a 20 years football career, playing career, and everybody knows what I've achieved as a player. But what really makes me proud is the recognition of the man and what I've been doing for my continent, trying to bring to contribute to development to the development of my continent and more specifically of my country, Côte d'Ivoire, with my charity work and also by contributing to the peace in Côte d'Ivoire in 2006, and I'm really happy with that. That's my biggest achievement. Thank you so much.
Didier Drobak, thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
Joining me now is Masai Ujiri, President and General Manager of the Toronto Raptors. Masai, it's lovely to see you. The last time we met, we were in Africa. I believe we were in Addis Ababa, and you were talking so passionately about the giants of Africa and the work that you're doing on the continent. I want to ask you, how is it going? How has it been impacted by the pandemic?
Hi, Zain. Thanks for having me. This is fun seeing you so far away. We were so close in Addis. You know, this is it's been a challenge. It's been a challenge for I think every one of us, and same goes for the work we do. Same goes for our foundation, but we found a way, you know, to just like everybody else to communicate with the youth of Africa and our followers with Giants of Africa. I wasn't able, and we were not able to go and do our camps physically this year, but I thought a good way to impact was one, almost do what everybody's doing, which is virtual contact with everybody and make sure we stay communicated. But also, Zain, I haven't said this everywhere, but we're taking this time to really build infrastructure. So some of the resources we had that we put into camps and basketball skills with these kids, we wanted to build during COVID. So hopefully we're unveiling something good when this is done.
And you were so happy at the number of girls in the basketball camp as well on the continent. And because women and girls have been so badly impacted, especially on our continent during this pandemic, how do you kind of see that gender recovery? It's something that I know you've prioritized. I know you care about it very much. And from your perspective, we'd love to know how you see the recovery when it comes to sport and young women on the continent.
I think we'll get back, Zain, and for young girls, I know it's always been a challenge with them. That's why we have brought them into our sport and paid particular attention and being intentional in doing the same thing we do with boys, we want to do with girls, and it's impacted so much because this brings camaraderie, this brings confidence, this brings, I think, them being even more vocal on what their ambitions are, their passions are, and what they want to do. So the programs we've really aligned with not only the Giants of Africa girls, but even hitting places like the Samburu Girls Foundation is such a joy for us to go fight their fight of mutilation, early marriages, all the things that young women are fighting on the continent.
One of the things that you pushed really hard for on the continent is to bring the NBA to Africa. And we're so excited and applaud you and thank you for all of your efforts. Why was it so important for you to bring the NBA to Africa?
You know, Zain, we see sports in the Western world in an incredible entrepreneurial way. You know, it's so much bigger, and there's so much to it. And now in Africa, we have to figure that out too. I look at the Raptors or the NBA and revenue generating talent, marketing, advertising, job opportunities, employment, all kinds of things that you look at that sports brings to us. We haven't tapped on that on the continent, and the NBA, through Adam Silver, through Amadou Gallo-Fall, through Mark Tatum, through all the people that have worked so hard, through even President Kagame in building an arena. Infrastructure is so big for us on the continent. We want to develop the game, where it brings opportunity for people, and they see it bigger than just something to do for leisure and fun, because we do have the talent.
What about the talent in the women's space, for example? How about plans for a women's NBA league in Africa? Have you thought about that?
You know, we think about it every day, and I think it's gradual. This is a great start for us with the men's league, and I know it's in all our minds that there is an opportunity with the talent on the continent, with all the tall ladies, athletic, speed, fast, smart. We think about it too, Zain, honestly, as not only the opportunity for people that play sports, but the opportunity that for people that are going to work in sports. We take that for granted. There's sports educationists, sports journalists, sports there's everything, sports psychologists, sports doctors, everything that you can think of. So we can find a niche and a way in what we want to do. And I think there's a huge opportunity for women here. But the league is on our mind. We start gradually. I think we'll get there.
Well, let's talk about sports and politics then. Okay, Masai, I mean, these last few years, the sports arena has become really a field to take some kind of a political stand, a stand on social issues of our day, or to take a knee and address racism and political issues that are at stake. What is your view on athletes advocating for social issues like that? Your view on what the NBA is doing?
Oh, I think we have an incredible platform to be a voice out there, not only for the youth, but for people who are not even opportune to have that same voice or to speak. With what's going on around the world, I think there's something special about sports that brings people together. It even takes me back to the day when I think Drogba knelt down, like in the World Cup and called for peace, in his country. It's gone back to days from athletes have really spoken. We see Kaepernick, we see LeBron James, all these guys, talking their minds and truth. And it comes down to humanity and who we are as people. I think sport has a way of bringing us closer. It makes us happy. And I think it's a way to interact. And I think these athletes are powerful because they mean well, and they can represent a good number of people in the world. It is important that we speak from our hearts and are good people.
Do you think that taking the knee, taking a stand on these kinds of issues is an American thing? Do you think that athletes in Africa, for example, would do more of that kind of stuff and take a political stand on the local relevant social issues of our day on the continent?
As we continue to advance in that space, Zane, it will get even more for the African athletes. We see, as I said, guys like Drogba. We see what Dikembe Mutombo is doing. There's so many I know that want to have this voice, Lual Deng, that speak, Jakim Noah, that they really, I think, talk on issues that are important because we do have a platform there to really perform.
And what about Nairobi? When are you going to visit Nairobi, my hometown?
That's my hometown too, with my mom. Like it's so special to me. So I can't wait. September. I can't wait to get back and to get back on the continent, doing quite a few countries in September. It's going to be fun to get back to normal.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We'll see you in Nairobi then. Asante sana, Masai Ujiri. We really appreciate your time. So good to see you.
Thanks, Zane. Thanks. This was great. And I'll see you soon. I'll see you in Nairobi.
Mesdames et messieurs, distingués invités, avant toute chose, permettez-moi de remercier les organisateurs de ce forum économique de Doha pour m'avoir associé à cette réflexion sur les conséquences de la pandémie sur nos pays. Et je dirais d'entrée de jeu que ces conséquences nous ont permis de dégager deux constats. Sur le plan sanitaire, elles ont mis à nu nos difficultés à pouvoir faire face à la prise en charge des malades à cause de la faiblesse de nos centres de santé qui non seulement ne sont pas suffisamment équipés, mais en plus ont des difficultés à organiser la prise en charge de nos malades. Sur le plan économique, nos pays qui sont à forte dépendance des importations de denrées de première nécessité ont marqué une sorte de crise à cause du fait que les producteurs qui nous servent à importer ces denrées de première nécessité ont dû fermer pendant toute cette crise de la pandémie. Et cela a eu un impact considérable sur la production locale. Cela nous pousse à réfléchir sur la diversification de notre économie et la relance de la production locale. La diversification parce que nous avons des économies qui, comme en République démocratique du Congo, dépendent fortement du domaine minier et cela doit absolument nous faire réfléchir sur la nécessité d'aller sur d'autres secteurs tels que l'agriculture ou encore le digital, qui sont des secteurs porteurs de beaucoup d'espoir de création d'emplois et également de richesse. Je dirais ici que grâce au forum qui a eu récemment à Paris sous l'égide du président Emmanuel Macron, nos partenaires multilatéraux ont pris une grande décision, une décision salutaire pour nos économies, celle d'accorder à l'Afrique les droits de tirage spéciaux à hauteur de 30 milliards de dollars, ce qui n'est pas suffisant, certes, mais quand même assez important pour soutenir nos économies. Et nous avons même convenu de multiplier les efforts pour essayer d'aller au-delà et atteindre même peut-être les 100 milliards de DTS. Cela pourrait fortement faire du bien à nos économies et nous permettre de pouvoir faire face aux crises futures qui se présenteraient éventuellement. Enfin, la nécessité de vacciner plus de 60% de la population africaine doit rester et demeurer un objectif pour nous, Africains, et nos partenaires devraient nous accompagner dans la poursuite de cet objectif. Voilà, mesdames et messieurs, distingués invités, ce que je peux dire, donner, apporter comme contribution aux réflexions que vous êtes en train de faire en ce moment. Je vous souhaite plein succès à vos travaux, plein succès au Forum économique de Doha.
For the first time in 25 years, Africa has been pushed into a recession. The United Nations Economic Commission for Africa projects negative 2.5% growth for the continent in 2021. The per capita income of several African nations is not expected to return to pre-pandemic growth levels until 2025. More than 32 million people fell into extreme poverty. The pandemic seriously damaged Africa's social sector. A lack of internet connectivity hit students hard. Students in Africa missed learning by more than 4 times compared with peers in the developed world. Bloomberg's Yinka Ibukua speaks to a man who is transforming Africa into a learning center of excellence.
Hello, Fred. Thanks for joining us today. My first question would be to get your thoughts about the disparities that have been highlighted by the fact that so many kids during the lockdown were learning remotely and using digital tools, using laptops and iPads and telephones to learn, but those who didn't have access to the internet were left out. What do you think are the long-term implications of that, and what lessons can we take from it now?
Well, I think, as you rightly mentioned, this moment has really revealed the disparities that exist between those who are digitally connected and those who are not. So the implications for this are much broader than just education. I think that this moment has really shown that as we rebuild the world post-COVID, we have to really ensure that we address as much of this digital divide as possible. So that means governments investing a lot more in broadband to make sure that we can close this gap. It means global organizations, those who are giving aid, thinking about how do you actually, really close the digital divide? Because if we can do that, it can really actually accelerate the pace at which education happens. But what it means that in the last year and a half, unfortunately, millions of people who come from poverty across Africa, hundreds of millions around the world, have really regressed in their education.
The pandemic has also caused budget pressures for all governments, including African ones. Are there some interesting innovations that you can point to where governments were able to figure out how to still serve their population?
Well, you see, one of the things that every crisis brings is opportunities. So yes, of course, many governments in Africa and around the world have seen revenues decline, tax collections go down as the general economic activity has dropped. But it also has forced us to think differently about how we do things, right? One of the things I really believe is that constraints drives innovation. And so we're seeing a lot more advances in digital health, digital education. Governments suddenly are having to digitize the services that they offer to their citizens. And so the flip side of the pandemic is that it has accelerated the pace of digital transformation across Africa. I was in Rwanda recently, and the government has had to develop a national registry for COVID. So every person who gets a COVID test has a unique ID that is put on the system, and it's really allowing them to really track what's happening, in healthcare across Africa, across the country. After the pandemic, that system can be expanded for general healthcare purposes to ensure that they can continue to provide digital health across the country and so forth. So there's a lot of innovations like this that have been accelerated by the pandemic, and I think it's up to us now to continue to invest in these innovations to ensure that post-pandemic we can actually rebuild a more equitable world and actually leverage innovation and technology to bring access to services that people have before not had, like education, healthcare, and access to markets, and then so many other things that technology allows us to do now.
And there's a lot of disparities within the continent with regards to access to education, rural versus urban, female versus male. But even for those who can afford the best education that the continent can provide, or even travel internationally to come back, there's still a very big resistance to going into government roles. And as a representative of the Africa Leadership Initiative, I'm just curious to know what you see being done to attract more young people into government to take over from the leadership that we have today.
Well, as you quite rightly pointed out, we cannot transform Africa and achieve our full potential without government. We need some of our best people to go into government. We need world-class human capital to go into government. Now, that being said, I personally do not believe that government should be big. I think that government ultimately should do three things. They need to enforce the rules, they need to create the rules, they need to enforce the rules, and then they need to get out of the way to really allow citizens to develop and enterprise to flourish and the creativity of their population to really come to bear. So we need a few people to go into government, a few talented, capable, people with good values who can actually bring world-class leadership to the public sector. And so we, for example, are channeling some of the leaders that we're developing into government. We're also launching an initiative to work with public sector to improve the leadership skills of those who are already in government to ensure that their human capacity improves. But I don't believe that you need a lot of people into government. You need a few excellent people.
Thanks so much, Fred. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Welcome, everyone. Our next topic is the test for global education, because the results are in. We've seen how COVID-19 has led to sharply reduced learning gains across the world, widening racial disparities in achievement, and of course, a rise in mental health afflictions among stuck-at-home students. We want to look for ways to chart the way forward and future-proof the global recovery efforts. So to help me do that are our panelists, Valerie Amos, the Master of University College at Oxford University, which is basically a fancy way of saying that she's the head of a college at Oxford. And in fact, she is the first Black head. Prior to that, she was director at University of London's School of Oriental and African Studies. She joins us from London. Joining us from Paris is Louise Mushikiwabo, the Secretary General of OIF, or La Francophonie. The OIF is an international organization that represents countries and regions where French is a customary language, and there's an affiliation with French culture. Louise was formerly a foreign minister for Rwanda. So I thank you both for joining us today on this important discussion. I want to start big and just get your thoughts on some themes that have emerged as we reflect on what we've seen so far in the past year or two. Louise, why don't I start with you? If you could describe the impact of COVID-19 on the Francophone region of the world, what are the top themes that stand out to you as you look back?
Well, thank you very much. The top theme really for not just the Francophone countries, but for all countries, I believe, is connection or no connection. And that is digital connection, and that is human connection. And that affects very much the area of education. Our organization is, among other themes, on the education of young people in our member states. We're 88 member states and governments. And what we noticed from the beginning of the pandemic was that even our own Francophone world was divided among those who have access to the internet, those who have access to medicines, and those who have very little or nothing in both areas. But beyond that, what the Francophone world has, which is shared with the world in general, is also the inequalities. The inequalities that came specifically with the economic crisis. For some of our member states in Africa, for example, even the economic crisis came ahead of the health crisis. As Africa was watching the rest of the world struggle with the pandemic in the beginning, countries got organized, leaders quickly got on television, gave the example on how to properly wash hands, talked about the possibility of closing borders, and so really did a fantastic job. But meanwhile, if you look at countries that are members, like in North Africa, Tunisia, Morocco, for example, East Africa, Rwanda, my own country, that are very much on tourism and services, the economic crisis really, as I said, was there even ahead of the health crisis, which took some time before it reached the continent. So those are, for me, the themes that stand out, the issues that became very apparent, and hopefully from which we are learning lessons, because the crisis is not over yet.
No, it's certainly not. And of course, it's moving forward or moving backwards at different paces. Valerie, let me come to you now, because we go from the Francophone region to higher education in the UK, where you're based. Obviously, teachers, students, institutions had to pivot overnight from in-person learning to remote learning, and that usually meant online learning, sometimes synchronous, sometimes asynchronous. From where you sit, what worked better than you expected? What should be retained? What should be discarded?
Well, first of all, let me absolutely agree with the points that Louise made. Those disparities, those differences, the kind of disadvantage that we've seen between countries, we're also seeing within countries, within communities, and also in higher education. So we have students who have greater access to digital technology, for example, were much more able quickly to pivot to online learning. But there was a huge amount of work, skills development that needed to be done with our academic colleagues at the same time as working with our students to move to do these new ways of doing things. And of course, they missed each other, and the element of knowledge development and learning that comes from that social interaction. And let's not forget, it's not just about our academic colleagues and about students, it's about a whole university community. The people who work in the services that support those students, support those staff, they were also badly affected. People had their families, their communities who were affected by COVID, and also higher education is global. We had many students who were not able to get home when we faced lockdown. What worked, what didn't work so well? We're still learning the lessons from that. We have a lot of our students who actually appreciated the putting, for example, of lectures online. They were able to go back to things, refresh their knowledge, their experiences. I think the isolation, learning alone, was something that people really didn't like, and putting in place different ways of bringing students and their tutors, their academic tutors together was very, very important. But also building a social sense was very important as well, because it's to be intellectually stimulated. It's partly about the intellectual bit of this journey, but it's also about the shared experiences of learning together. That was very important. And you mentioned in your introduction the mental health elements of this. I think that it will take us some time to see the way that this has impacted not just universities, but our wider community. We have certainly put a lot more support into welfare and well-being for our students and our staff as we have into the tuition element, the teaching element, the learning element over the last few months.
That's a really important point, and we'll get to that shortly. But I want to pick up on what you mentioned, Valerie, about putting in place different ways to create connections and shared social experiences. Louise, can you talk a little bit about the specific new initiatives that you've undertaken during this pandemic and the impact or the challenges you may have experienced while trying to implement them across the different regions that you cover?
Sure. The first thing we did at Francophonie within, I'd say, 2 weeks was to put together and organize for ease of use educational materials in French. And we noticed that very quickly some of the young people, the students, the countries, the schools were consuming these educational materials. But at the same time, we noticed, and we were aware of this, that many of our young people were not able to access the educational materials simply because they didn't have the tools. So we continued to provide culturally accurate materials for those who were connected, but we also, with our mainly with our Institute for Education, the Francophone Institute for Education, which is based in Dakar, Senegal, quickly developed programs for those who were not, young people who were not connected, mainly with radio programs, TV programs, in support of countries which quickly also tried to scramble and figure out what to do, especially in the education area when confinement started. It became very difficult because, of course, lack of tools, lack of connection, large families sharing one TV or one radio or one computer and so forth. Another thing we did quickly was to respond to the economic side of things. And we put together within months a fund that would come to support women who lost their livelihoods just because they could not go out and work. And we're talking about women who are in the most vulnerable situations, whose livelihood depends on walking out of their homes in the morning, going to the market, selling small things, tomatoes, soap, vegetables on the market, and they couldn't do it. So many of these women were affected across the world and across the Francophone world, of course. So what we did here at headquarters in Paris is we put together quickly monies that were not used for travel, for conferences, for workshops, and started this fund called La Francophonie avec elle, literally Francophonie on the side of women, to bring a bit of money to support these women during this time, especially of confinement. And we were able, and I'm very proud of that because we tend to be very slow in the multilateral world, that the Francophonie was able to actually disburse to 59 projects, initiatives across the Francophone world, 20 countries, to women that were in economic precarity. I have had the opportunity since last year to visit some of these women, and in Togo, in Lebanon, and recently in Rwanda, my own country, and very happy to see that, you know, we don't realize that when we live in big cities and, you know, making big international salaries, that even 100 euros can go a long way to support these women. So that fund is there. We're now in the second phase. Projects are being selected across the world. And so that economic support was extremely important. There are other things we did, putting together innovators in the digital world, young people mostly, also from more than 60 countries, connecting them, sharing ideas. And I'm really happy to say that we were positively surprised by the talent and the kind of innovation to support their own communities, that young people across the world actually were really up to the task, and that connection of Francophone innovators in the digital area is still on as well.
It's a great example of how you can use something that worked in one place and apply it as best practices across the region and really scale your response and the possible solutions out there. I want to talk briefly, Valerie, and go back to the point you mentioned, which was about mental health, because as you look at how to solve for the issues that have arisen because of the pandemic, we know that government funds education, and governments love to spend time and money to try to resolve longstanding issues. So save the government some time and money for us here. What do you think is the hardest truth about some possible solutions to these increased mental health concerns? What's worked perhaps somewhere else in the world that could be applied to where you are?
So first of all, in terms of who funds education, I think it's really important in the context of the United Kingdom to be clear that it is not just the government that funds education. Students themselves fund their education through the fees that they pay, the tuition fees. You have major donors who support us. There are the research councils and the huge amount of research that we see that is the result of international collaboration across the world from research councils. And of course, I'm incredibly proud that, Oxford was right up there developing a vaccine to help with the pandemic. And I think one of the big learnings that we have seen, particularly in relation to science, is that increased collaboration and the importance of working together. To come specifically to your point about mental health, I don't think that we can point to any one place that does this really, really well. I think that there are aspects of it. What we have found is that it's important to be available 24/7, to have a team made up of people from different communities with different skill sets, so that individuals feel able to approach members of that team, to have other resources available for those who need more intense work, to recognize that we need to work collaboratively across universities on this. And because some of our students were not with us here in college, to find ways of picking up the kinds of almost invisible signs that you would sometimes get as a result of us being together, that someone is experiencing challenges and difficulties. So where and how you invest the money, where you put the kind of human resources and the contact, and open up the opportunity to call on a range of organizations working across a range of different issues is incredibly important. And just being available to talk, that human interaction has become more and more important the more isolated we have become. And it's the thing that we cannot let go of. It is costly in terms of time and in terms of financial and other resources, but we have to make those investments.
And of course, everyone is also moving on to a world that's very uncertain. We know that COVID has exacerbated existing inequities. The rich got richer, the poor got poorer, and more than ever, people are just trying to get by, to make do. We touched on this earlier, this idea of digital connection, connectivity. Clearly, the US, parts of Europe are emerging from the pandemic because of mass vaccines. That's not the case in Asia, in Africa, in Latin America. So Louise, let me come to you, because this is something that obviously touches upon your part of the world. For the children who are not online and on our rural parts of the country, their country with no online connectivity, what are the immediate solutions beyond waiting, beyond getting donations? What can be done more quickly in the next 6 months, in the next 1 year?
Well, what we noticed with our experience, especially in the first few months of confinement, was that, as I said, in one household, there was one TV, maybe one smartphone, and a few young students, their parents. By the way, the teachers as well. We noticed that some of the teachers that are trained by our institute based in Dakar were not really savvy. They were not very conversant with how to quickly use some of these digital tools for education. So what we did with our institute was to quickly find offline solutions to provide access to educational resources. But we also noticed that social media became a very good tool for education, where teachers started sending homework to young people on their parents' smartphones, and that works. Now, what is clear for us, and this is probably where I should have started, is that education without access to the internet for a big part of the world is a major, major issue that I think as we slowly come out of this, hopefully, this pandemic, it's something we need to look at. It should be a global concern. The kind of inequality that, beyond health goes into lack of education is something that really calls for very much global cooperation. Of course, money is the issue because education, of course, is to begin with an area that is budget consuming. But it's something we really need to look at carefully. And hopefully one of the lessons is that funding for solutions that are not necessarily based on access to the internet, as well as providing more access to the internet for young people, especially for people in the area of education, really should become a priority lesson coming out of the crisis, at least for the long term.
Sure, sure. Louise, let me come to you. Valerie, let me come to you for the final question here. I do want to touch on vaccine diplomacy because Louise mentioned global cooperation. You have countries like the US donating now doses, finally. Countries like China and Russia also have used their vaccine rollout to gain credibility, to gain influence in developing countries. Very quickly here, what do you think are the long-term effects of that kind of vaccine diplomacy on young people as they seek higher education and look to build their futures?
So I think the first thing is that our young people will look at is essentially how long it took for countries to really get together and to deliver on something which we all know is important, which is none of us is safe until we're all safe. And whilst we all recognize and understand that, of course, a government will prioritize its own people first, we saw many countries procure way more vaccine than they actually needed. And it took a long time to actually persuade those countries that we needed to share. And what has come out of the G7, the 7 richest countries in the world this weekend, is really important. But there was also the MasterCard Foundation, 1.3 billion over 3 years in partnership with the Africa Center for Disease Control, the COVAX Consortium through the World Health Organization. All of these are incredibly important. It's not just about individual countries seeking influence. It needs to be the world working together. And that's what our young people are fighting for. If you look at the way that they have been active around things like Black Lives Matter, around climate change, around Me Too, they are using social media and their power to act collectively across the world. And the governments are coming in behind that. They're much slower. Our young people are going to look to faster action for their governments, or they're going to do it themselves.
Well said. I want to thank both of you so much for joining us on this panel on global education. Valerie Amos of Oxford University and Louise Mushikiwabo of the OIF.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Joining me now is Mozambique's Graça Machel. Thank you so much for being with us on the program. Graça, it's so great to see you.
Thank you so very much for having me.
Graça, I want to talk about women, girls, and adolescents. They've been so hard hit during the pandemic around the world, and especially in Africa. Can you highlight for us what has happened?
Let me start with girls. About 20 million girls are at risk of not coming back to school. And you can imagine what it means losing an opportunity of becoming part of the 21st century for 20 million girls who are our children. Women, it has been said, most of them lost their livelihoods But more than the material losses, women have lost their sense of dignity when they cannot earn a living, when they cannot provide for their families, when they become vulnerable to looking for food every day, they lose their jobs. And more grave even is to feel so vulnerable to this virus, to which until today, no one in my continent has an idea of when they can get a vaccine. When in the other parts of the globe, people are talking of millions who are being vaccinated and percentages which go over 80% of population which have been vaccinated. And on my continent, less than 2% of the almost 1 billion of Africans, they do not know when they can have a vaccine. So they are vulnerable to at any time, be infected and dying of this deadly, virus. And this is the environment where girls and women are living on my continent. I don't want you to believe that we are hopeless. Because I have to say, if our communities are still striving today, if our communities are still alive, this is due to African women in their families, in their relentless capacity of reinventing themselves, finding the impossible ways of putting food on the table of their families. And even though there's difficulties, where yes, they are going out there to have access to health, access to children going to school. All this is really responsibility of African women. It's not necessarily the state institutions, it's the women who are making it impossible for us to be somehow the society we are. So I'm talking of the challenges, but at the same time, I want to put women at the center of our recovery as a human family, and particularly the recovery of African societies and the economies.
And how do we do that? How can the world recover the momentum that it's lost on so many of the issues that you care about simply because of the pandemic's impact and a vaccine nationalism that you eloquently talked about how it's impacted women, girls, adolescents, and the whole continent of Africa?
I would really appeal to our sense of identity as human beings, to recognize that every single human being counts and has to be valued. This means in our strategies of reconstructing after this horrible pandemic is to put human beings at the center of what we are doing. And I worry that sometimes we talk much more of economies and the numbers and the monies which are required, but not necessarily thinking of a child, an adolescent, and boy and girl, the young people, women, so that your strategies of recovery will be focusing on the specific needs of each social group I have just mentioned. It's not about numbers, it's about people. This is first. I think the other thing which worries me really is how do we come to a situation where when we were united to say this virus is a threat to all of us, once we have vaccines, then some leaders, they decided that their populations are more important than the rest of the population of the world. I just can't understand. I can't understand. And this comes back to the issue of, it's not really, it's more than solidarity. It's an issue of seeing yourself with the eyes and the feelings of the other, and to feel that you are because someone else is. We talk of the Ubuntu. It's not too late to continue to talk about it. But really, we need to go back to the sense of belonging to the same human race, human family, and the rights to life are the rights of every single person. You are in Africa, you are in Latin America, you are in Asia, you are in Europe, you are in America. All of us, we have the same rights. And this nationalism, for me, is the worst demonstration of a failure in the values we always say we believe in, and we build our societies on the basis of equality. So I believe we need really to go back to the basics. We need to go back to the basics.
Well, if we need to go back to those basics and look at those important values that you articulated just now, what would be a final thought for the entire forum that you can leave us with that would be a thought on empowering future generations and what that looks like to you?
I believe we have to build a legacy for future generations, which is based on the values of equality, of equity, of respect for human dignity, of feeling and acting as the destiny of each one of us is deeply related and realizable if it's linked to the destiny of others. I think this is the ground in which young generation, in my view, should be nurtured. And I'm saying should be nurtured to grow, knowing that they have to be closing the gap of inequality, closing the gap of poverty, closing the gap of these artificial, walls which we have built of those who are developed and not those who are not developed, and the right of certain people to achieve their potential and others not. I think future generations have to go back to the basics of all of us as human race, as a human family, working together on the basis of equality. Second, I believe that future generations have to be empowered with the tools of knowledge and science for all. Again, it's unacceptable that we'll have millions of young people not having access to education, or if they have access to a school, they complete primary school without knowing how to read and write and count. It's unacceptable in 21st century with the tools and the capacities we have not to be able to adequately educate our young people and for them to have the tools to realize themselves fully in their potential. It's ennobling young generations. I believe also it is unacceptable for us to leave a legacy in which we don't care for the future of the planet. This planet is not ours. It was lent to us and we have to leave it to young generations to come. We need to confront the impact of the development options which we have made, which are destroying the planet. We don't have the right to leave a planet which is in disarray as it is, because it belongs to young generations. We have to be able to mend, the errors we have made, to respect what science is saying as how really to rejuvenate the planet and to offer to new generations in a healthy and prosperous situation.
Mozambique's Graça Machel, thank you so much.
Thank you, Zain. It was a pleasure to be with you.
We wanted to end our program on a special note. Earlier this week, I went to Doha's beautiful opera house, home to the Qatar Philharmonic Orchestra. This brings us to a close of the inaugural Qatar Economic Forum, powered by Bloomberg. Our planet is facing so many serious challenges, but it is often said that it is better to light a candle than curse the darkness. And I really hope over the last few days that we have been able to spread a little bit of light down that path toward a better future. I'd like to leave you now with an upcoming album by the very talented Dana Al-Fardan, who's composed this music for us today in conjunction with some musicians here who will be performing her piece from the Qatar Philharmonic Orchestra. It's called Indigo, and I really, really hope that you enjoy it. We have to give a special thanks as well to His Highness Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani for his incredible support here and has made this event really possible. So thank you to the Emir of the State of Qatar, and thanks also to our amazing contributors, our participants and speakers, and also to our viewers. Thank you for sticking with us over the past few days, and we've really enjoyed your interaction and your feedback. I'm Zain Verji. Thank you so much. Good night from Doha.